Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Welcome to a special mini-series of the Numinous Podcast, Portrait of a Marriage, where we revisit a blog post I published in 2017 on resolving the traps of an anxious and avoidant partnership. In other words, a relationship where one partner, in this case me, a cis white woman, tends to have a more avoidant attachment style, and the other partner, in this case my husband Ruben, a cis white man, tends to express a more anxious attachment style. We're reading through that blog post and giving you updates on all the strategies we tried to earn the more secure attachment we have now. We'll be honest about what worked, what really did not, and we'll bring the article up to date to let you know where we are in our marriage now. Where are we? Are we good?
In our marriage?
Yeah.
better than we've ever been.
Yeah. We often joke that we've had several marriages, and I think this is like our fifth.
Number
fifth
5.
Marriage.
We're at marriage number 5.
Yeah, we've been married 10 years, 5 times to each other, it seems like.
5 times to completely different each others.
Yeah. Ruben, I looked up my stats in Medium. I mentioned in the last episode that this had been a blog post that went just on my old WordPress website in 2016. And it was a rougher draft, and then it got sort of fleshed out and reposted on Medium in August of 2017. And it's had like 19,000 readers, which I know for a real writer, that's not that many. But for me, even now, even as a published cookbook author, I think 19,000 people reading that article and talking about it and having...
You have not sold 19,000 cookbooks.
I have not. I hope there's a very long tail. People should buy the cookbook because, it is something that was born of our marriage. If I didn't have the marriage that I have, I wouldn't have been able to write such a beautiful and lush cookbook. It's called The Spirited Kitchen, by the way. Anyway, we're getting off track. So...
Before you start again,
yes.
I think maybe we should have another cat update.
Yeah.
Since last time Cat was snoring.
This time Cat has decided she wants to be exactly right beside the microphone.
So she's sitting on the table between us. Oh, now she hears her name and
past.
She's prancing.
Yep, she's out of here. Anyway, so
All
there
right.
could be background ambient noise. We're trying to present secure attachment with Cat.
Cat has a very disinterested attachment style.
Yeah, she's very avoidant. So what I thought I'd do, Ruben, is try to help us get a little further into the article. So I think this is a good place to pick back up here. We were talking previously about what secure attachment looks like. Secure attachers are not highly vigilant in relationships. They expect and trust that their partners value and love them and are able to calmly move through conflict without catastrophizing or holding on to the past. They're good at modeling how to be relaxed in relationships. The qualities required to make other humans feel safe in relationships, that of being responsive, attuned, and available, come naturally to secure attachers. I think it's important to be conservative and recognize that there is a danger in labeling your partner by their attachment style. It can feel erasing and dehumanizing to be told, "You're so avoidant," or "Stop being so anxious," as though that's all we're about. For other people, it can feel affirming to discover that your natural way of being is a legitimate thing with a name and research and literature, but we can think of attachment styles as either traits or states. So yes, we have attachment styles, which a lot of the literature will call traits, but labeling each other by them implies they are static, monolithic, and fixed. They are not. If we take a pro-relationship stance and choose to see ourselves and our partner as evolving creatures, doing the best they can in the moment, then we can cut them some slack for being in an avoidant or anxious state during a blow-up. Yes, we all have fairly enduring habits and tendencies in terms of how we relate to important people in our lives, but they are not rigid and immovable. They're less like the bones of our personality and more like our musculature. They're tough to change because the habits of thought, speech, mannerism, and behavior shaped by our attachment experiences are deeply imprinted on our psyche and body. But some researchers think of attachment styles as states that can change, sometimes dramatically, from relationship to relationship. With a parent, you may be more avoidant, and with your partner, you may be more anxious. You might be a generally secure person, but have strong feelings of fear and anxiety in an argument with your partner. So for the sake of clarity in this article, I'll be using terms like the avoidant partner or the anxious attacher, but I find it more helpful, and it often feels more hopeful for my clients, if I frame attachment styles as states. In my own marriage, we use these terms as shorthand, but we understand that we are more than our attachment style assessment results. Our styles have evolved to be more secure over time, and it's totally normal to enter states of anxiety or avoidance when intimacy issues resurface. So when you're just starting to enter the terrain of this conversation with your partner, remember it's important not to generalize too much. We're going to talk about that part, more sweeping generalizations and broad statements when we talk about fighting. So we're going to get into the exhilarating highs and the terrifying lows when anxious and avoidant attachers come together. But I think that this passage, like if I were to update it, I wouldn't even talk about traits. I would only talk about states. I would only talk about tendencies, because it's just so evident and so clear how adaptable and malleable our attachment styles can be.
What do you see the difference is between traits and tendencies?
So it's actually traits and states, I would say, are the two things that and I would say states and tendencies are similar. So traits to me are things that are conditioned and an almost autonomic response in our nervous system. You know, it is a trait similar to how fast our hair grows. It's like, you know, or we have a certain body type. It's the same kind of thing to me. Whereas a state is responsive to the environment and can change pretty wildly moment to moment. And as it turns out, attachment for a lot of people, I would argue most, is so variable because it depends on the relational field. It really does depend. There are very few people that I've ever experienced who, you know, if they have a fairly broad social circle or they know more than one or two people that they're interacting with, then they tend to have a fairly variable attachment style that depends on that relationship. As the social circle or the milieu gets more and more narrow or more and more intense and they have fewer people in their circle, it can seem like that's their personality, that's a trait, it's fairly fixed. But what I found is that as soon as they get exposed to like more secure people or other, you know, environments where they really do feel safe and seen, you notice pretty quickly that these latent parts of themselves start to flourish. So I think it's very environmental. Mm-hmm. That's my experience working with, you know, many, many people and in both one-on-one and in groups. I think the data, the science that they have used to determine like what is secure attachment, I also think that's very white. I think it's very oriented towards almost like neoliberal, polite white culture kind of stuff. And yeah, it's like very easy to have these styles labeled as traits, and I think that's a little too deterministic.
Yeah, so I guess traits and tendencies. I think that in my experience, the attachment response, whatever we want to like say, you know, avoidance is a lot more predictable than it's just like, what's happening in the field right now? Like it's this base setting modulated by what's happening in the field. So, you know, yeah, as we said in the last talk, under stress, we revert quite predictably
to like a default setting.
To a default setting.
Yeah.
And so I think that default setting is informative, you know, and
I don't want to say
us
it's
great
not
compassion.
informative. For sure. I just think that a lot of the science that gets applied to adults was actually child studies and extrapolated. And I just think it's too easy to go, oh, look, their environment growing up was like this, and so therefore they are that. And I think people get pretty narrow in their thinking about that and don't consider that, oh, but then all of this happened when you were an adolescent and all of that happened once you left home and all of this has happened, you know, in your 20s and 30s. All of these things are shaping our attachment style. And so although it's very helpful, and yes, there's a fairly predictable pattern. We can see, oh, your primary caregiver was like this. Your nervous system has been shaped. There is autonomic shaping. I don't want to say that there isn't, but I think the language of trait, sounds, feels, is represented as fairly fixed. That it's a trait just like you have blue eyes and I have brown. And it's not. It's not like that. Yeah. Okay, let's get into the fighting.
Okay. Awesome.
This section is called The Exhilarating Highs and the Terrifying Lows. When an avoidant and an anxious attacher come together, it can be fraught. A roller coaster, a recipe for disaster, a case of chronic conflict. Blissful union to train wreck argument in under a minute. Oh, it's disappointing when that happens.
Yes.
Violent arguing with draining, damaging efforts at, quote, communication at all hours of the day or night. Emotional recovery for the next 9 days. Further scarring over the wounds.
It's been a long time since we've had those big, long, deeply scarring fights.
It has been a long time, but I'm noticing your eyes are wet and salty. My nose is kind of getting tingly.
Yeah.
What are you feeling?
Well, I was, you know, I don't have such a great head for detail, but yeah, I remember how long and painful some of those conflicts could be. And so that's what I'm getting salty about.
I remember one time we were fighting. This was in North Van on East 2nd. This is a long time ago. This is year 1 or 2 of our relationship. And we started an argument at like 1 a.m. And by the time 3:30 rolled around, I was naked on the floor across the room, not wanting to come back into the bed and like shivering. My teeth were chattering. My fingers were blue. I was so like, I felt like a caged animal. I couldn't get out. I didn't want to get back into bed with you, but also I was like, oh my God, this is so dumb. Why are we still fighting? And I remember getting back into the bed. You were like, Carmen, fine, I'll stop talking. Come back into the bed. I got back into the bed and my teeth wouldn't stop chattering. I see now I was like physically cold from being outside, but my freeze response was so intense. And you were talking to me being like, all I need is for you to hear this and listen. And literally it was like there was no oxygen in the room and I started falling asleep. And you got so mad. Yeah. You got so mad that it's like you don't care about me. And looking back now, like neither of us would let it get to the point where one person's trauma response is so intense that their brain is turning off and the other person is like, I need you to hear me. You don't even care.
Well, so that's the famous concrete box. That's Carmen's famous concrete box.
That's right.
And yeah, we don't, we recognize that now, and it's not as triggering because we understand what it is.
Well, and I hardly ever get there now.
Yeah, so we hardly ever get there. But even when we were getting there still, it was like, oh, okay, this is the concrete box. Well, there's nothing we can do about that. And
we have to down tools on this argument. I'll meet you back in whatever it was at the end of the day or tomorrow. Or then we also started to learn like, okay, you can only fight for so many minutes, and then your nervous system is just not as effective at fighting anymore. So you have to down tools, you have to shift attention and go to something else. And that's like one of the skills of self-regulation is just like holding that hot potato, even though you're still mad, you're going to like still be in solidarity or still be bonded, even as you go, okay, this matters, this is important, but we're not going to keep arguing this point. We're going to come back to it. But for now, let's just finish making this omelet or breakfast or whatever it is. And, that's really hard.
And stop trying to unscramble this omelet.
Yeah.
So this feels like a really huge and important topic, like this concrete box and the understanding of what the concrete box is, and that you can't, and that it's not a moral failing on your part, and it's not a reaction because you don't love me, so that it's so I feel like that's a huge chunk. And with that, it seems really closely tied to co-regulation. And we made a big shift in our marriage towards being present to co-regulate each other.
Yeah, and we actually at first needed to sort of be like, okay, flags, like send up a flare. And we were very kind of robotic about it. It's like, I need co-regulation. And then the other person would be like, okay. And we would imagine downing tools like our weapons and putting on, I think of it as the Teflon armor. And it's like, I'm going to self-regulate because Ruben has said, Carmen, I need some co-regulation, which means I am fucking pissed. I am going to sling some arrows at you or at the world or whatever. And I need you to not take it personally. I need you to just like hear me. And then my job is to be like, okay, I'm going to self-regulate to the best of my ability. I'm not going to take any of this personally. I'm just going to like beam kind eyes. I'm going to try to move close. I'm going to lower my voice. I'm going to be like, okay, I'm listening. What I hear you say is this. That kind of thing. And then if I start to get triggered because it's too many arrows, I have to be like, okay, so I'm getting to my upper limit and I love you. Let's revisit this in 20 minutes so that I can, walk away. I can go have a shower, whatever I need. And that was awkward and fumbling for a while. But it was a really important pattern interrupt so that we didn't do that, sensitizing triggering word to like escalation, trigger to response ratio way out of whack, and then hours and hours of trying to talk our way back.
Yeah, and we didn't do the arguing about every word in a sentence thing. Like the saying, I need co-regulation is just like, you shut up and listen to me now. And then you give me warm co-regulatory response.
Kind eyes, you work on your vocal prosody.
And there was lots of the, like, that makes sense to me. I can see why that's so upsetting to you. I imagine that I would feel that way if
we did a lot of, because I know you, because I know your character. And so it was a lot of like reaching with my whole heart to your whole heart, or your whole heart to my whole heart, to be like, this is just a little bean. This is a little baby mammal. This is a tiny tiger in front of me that just needs me to hear them. And I don't have to take it personally, and I don't have to fix it. Even though sometimes I'm like, fix this, or I'm like angry. It's been a journey it's much smoother now, but we did need to just be like, ding, ding, ding. Okay, intervention. This is what we're doing. I need co-regulation. And that was like the code words. I need co-regulation, instead of the other person being like, oh my God, what are we about to fight about? Which was my avoidant response. Oh my God, what did I do now? Jesus. I'd be like, okay, my person is regressing to a very angry state right now, or is not necessarily regressing, but I would try to imagine your inner little. Yeah.
Well, and I as much as we tried to imagine the inner little, I think it would have been productive for us to do that way more. Like to actually just really be consciously and deliberately looking at the other person as if they are a hurt child.
Yeah. It took a long time to get to that.
Yeah.
Because we are our own hurt children that are like angry and mad and sad and hurt. So it takes a while to develop the somatic capacity to presence your like wisest, most loving self, and like, look at your partner as just a hurting child. That takes a lot of practice. Yeah.
But that's really like, that's a lot of what's actually going on, is behind all the words and the arguments and the justifications and the reasons and the door slamming and all of that is actually just like this kid like crashed their bike and skinned their knee and wants to be like held.
Yeah, and needs the other partner to be like, oh my God, are you okay? Instead of like, or whatever.
Instead of putting a video on YouTube.
Okay, back to the article. Anxious and avoidant attachers hook up all the time, though, because their wounds feed each other and affirm their existing worldview. They may bring out the worst in each other, but their malfunctioning dynamic confirms what they've long suspected about themselves, their deep-seated fears of unworthiness, which often originate in childhood and may have been compounded in other relationships, are perceived as the reason they can't find a stable relationship. Okay, we're getting to the juicy part now. Statistically, it is less common to have an avoidant wife and an anxious husband combination. Generally speaking, in Western heteropatriarchal culture, women are conditioned to be anxious attachers and men are conditioned to be avoidant attachers. But attachment style isn't entirely rooted in early childhood development or conditioning or trauma. It's also at least partially epigenetic. It's also at least partially shaped by our history of relationships in adulthood. And I would argue that it's also at least partially caused by living in a traumatizing patriarchal culture. Okay, I'm like downplaying this here. This was really at a point where I was just about to go insane, or I had just gone insane and had like a major health crisis, feeling suffocated and trapped under the weight of patriarchy. So, in other words, we are programmed and conditioned to be this way, and it's not something that can just be turned off like a light switch. It's not easy to pivot, even when we know our behavior is making both of us miserable. I happen to work with a lot of strong women and sensitive men. More precisely, I happen to work with a lot of women who've survived both developmental and shock trauma and are regularly re-traumatized by living under patriarchy and have developed a fortified stance in order to survive and protect themselves from constant threat to their very existence. I also work with a lot of men who've survived developmental trauma, are regularly re-traumatized by living under patriarchy, and have learned to sacrifice themselves at any cost in order to survive and maintain some kind of connection, no matter how meager, with other humans. Their experiences within the anxious avoidant trap in reversed roles, quote, reversed roles from assumed social norms, are not as commonly reflected back to them in the relationship literature and research. It can be demoralizing and frustrating for everyone. All of this can seem like an impossible situation to reconcile. But does it have to be? I don't believe so. Okay, I'm going to read this last little bit, actually. Okay. All of the literature says that anxious and avoidant attachers should steer clear of each other and avoid the drama in the first place. If only it weren't for that great chemistry. But what if you're already in it and don't feel ready to give up? Or don't feel you can throw in the towel just yet because of having younger children together or something else? Or maybe you have separated, but you have children and still must work together to co-parent. Or maybe a psychic told you that this was the love of your life and you are a bit superstitious about that. What if you're just, I didn't write that, but for the listeners, just, what if you're just stuck with each other? I know that in many circumstances, the anxious avoidant dynamic can evolve to a more secure dynamic. I know that with compassion and a top-down, bottom-up approach, we can work together to support aliveness, fulfillment, and connection in our relationships, no matter our attachment dynamic. So I think I want to share about my health crisis. So I was already doing attachment stuff. We had already done NVC, Imago, we were on our third couples therapist by then. And I did not feel like I could get through to you on certain issues without feeling like you were minimizing what I was saying or being dismissive or equating our two trauma histories. We're both traumatized people. That was so frustrating for me because there was all this power that you held that you didn't think you did or couldn't see. And anytime I would get upset or I would need attention, I would be mad or whatever, I would know that I would then have to caretake you for days sometimes. If I got mad, if we had an argument, I was always going to end up apologizing to you. Even if I was very justifiably the person harmed or the person who should be upset, I would somehow always end up apologizing to you. And I could see how this was patriarchy. I could see how this analysis was happening. But here you are, a sensitive 90s guy that is, maybe not proclaiming yourself a feminist, but presented as like the more reasonable, emotionally intelligent, the calmer one, like all these things. It was so frustrating. And really one day we had a huge argument, and I was so exasperated at feeling unheard that I started to, at first I think I just need to cry, but then I couldn't sort of catch a breath. And I was like, I need to go for a walk because I'm so exasperated that I actually can't catch a breath. And as I was walking, it got worse and worse. And I started to think I was having a heart attack. And I knew, knowing about panic attacks, I knew I wasn't having a heart attack, but I also didn't know I wasn't having like, I honestly was like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And I walked to our friend Brooke's house and sort of calmed down and was like, okay, I do think that was just a panic attack. That's so weird. The anger I was feeling, I honestly thought I was going to die. I came home. We were talking, we were resolving, and then it started happening again. And I could feel that, like, I can't breathe. My heart was like in my throat. And then I started to, it was like I was on a boat, and everything started spinning and I couldn't stand up. And it was just like, oh my God. And this was vertigo. So you got me onto the bed, and then it was like an axe hit me across the forehead, and there was such piercing pain in my prefrontal cortex that I was like, I'm having a brain aneurysm. I am definitely dying. And you were like, I was laying on the bed, and very difficult time saying words to you. And finally I was just like, call 911. Like, I really couldn't understand what was happening. I thought I was having a brain aneurysm. I thought I was dying. And I remember there was two things that happened. Our neighbors had a very loud, like, vintage car with a very loud muffler. And while we were waiting for the ambulance to come, that car came, and it was like this feeling of dread came over me, where I felt, the closest I could say is like I felt pursued. It was like this ominous sound. And then right after that, the ambulance came, and the ambulance was backing up, and the backup beep? Every time the beep went, it was like an electric shock in my brain, in my eyes. And, they came in and basically were like, you have vertigo and maybe some anxiety. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? That's it? And I couldn't, they were like, you could go to the hospital and like have your heart checked out or whatever. But I was like, well, what can I do for the vertigo? Like, I didn't want to go to the hospital with vertigo. And they were like, we can give you some, anti-nausea medication in the butt. And I was like, okay, give it to me, because I just wanted to be knocked out. So that was the first time that I had this trifecta of the intensity of the stress and the futility and the hopelessness and the sense of being trapped just like caused everything to burst. And I had this trifecta in the course of about 90 minutes of a panic attack, vertigo, and then a migraine. And that the lingering effects of that carried on for a few months. I did go to a vestibular specialist. He was like, he put the goggles on me and stuff. And he was like, well, like most women, you tend to underreport your pain and stress. And I was like, I don't think I'm underreporting it. I'm fucking telling my husband what I'm upset about and what I need. It's that I am screaming into the void. And as soon as he does get it, I didn't say this to poor vestibular guy, but it was like, I realized as soon as you would actually really be able to hear the depth of my pain, you would collapse. And then I would have to caretake you. And I was just like, I'm so fucking exhausted. I'm so tired. I can't do this anymore. And that was really awful. And pretty much from then on, I was like, fuck this. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not gonna, and it's taken a few years. It took a while to stop doing that thing where I have to be absolutely broken in order for you to listen. I'm just not doing that anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm not like, nope. I don't let it get to that point, but also, I'm just going to cast about elsewhere.
That's several years past.
It's several years past, though we did have something fairly recently. We had a money argument 2 weeks ago, mm-hmm. and same kind of thing happened where I had expressed like, so I'm anxious. I don't like how this feels. Could you help me out in this way? And your anxiety kind of spiked. And you were like, well, if it's really serious. And I was like, wow, okay. So I explained this and this and this. But I had to kind of recognize like, okay, so I'm not going to re-explain how bad it is for me. I'm going to take that elsewhere because I'm not going to break in order for him to be able to help me. And also, he's so fucking burnt out right now that he just can't. If he was well, he would be like, okay, I believe in you. Yes, here you go. And we would share in that kind of way. But there two things needed to happen. I needed to say, I'm not going to like convince him how anxious or stressed I am so that he can step into like a savior role and feel edified in his role in our relationship as, the ballast. And also, he's not good right now. And if he could, he would. So I had to also recognize like, it's okay. This isn't a thing that we need to, it doesn't have to be a thing in our relationship. I have more resilience and resource right now. And relative to him, I can handle this. Mm-hmm. So it still comes up sometimes where I'm like, how much do I throw to him if he's giving me like, you seem okay. I'm not going to do that thing where I'm like, you're not listening to me. You're not tracking me. Here's all the ways in which I'm not okay. I definitely am like, okay, so that is the limit to whatever, to patriarchy, to his nervous system, to whatever. And I don't take it quite as personally anymore. Whereas before I was like, fuck you then. I was really like, see? And now I'm like, I can take the contextual cues and apply them much better. So, but generally speaking, yes, it's been a long time since I had to have like a nervous breakdown or a physiological break before you were like, my wife is trying to communicate with me. What was your experience of like, Carmen is breaking down and telling me it's because she's so frustrated with me?
Well, I don't remember, 3 years of pandemic between now and, so we actually, you and I entered pandemic in a pretty good state and worked very well together through pandemic. So
because we thrive in collapse, babe. It's like, I was like, you're so awesome, you're so sexy, and you were like, you're the best. Yeah,
I wouldn't say thrive, but yes.
We had an unfair advantage because we were so prepared psychologically. But yes, we worked great.
So, so I'm trying to remember back, this must be like 5 years ago or something like that.
For sure. Oh no, it's longer than that. Yeah, so this was like 2016, 17.
Right. So my brain is not remembering that. Like I do remember that, but I guess I remember that, but it seems kind of all of a piece to me, and I don't really remember sort of stages or thoughts or anything. This seems very much involved with the sort of co-regulation thing that we were talking about, that it was just, it's kind of like we entered a state of just stopping arguing and just listening and believing.
Well, I had gone to do my training in dynamic attachment repatterning, which is somatic experiencing based attachment work with Diane Poolheller. And we went to one, I came back, we were really connected, and then that kind of faded. I was like, oh, I didn't consciously think this, but I was already sort of formulating like, oh, look, me presencing secure attachment and doing all the things that he wants me to do isn't magically getting him to hear me. Like, something else is needed here. And so it would fade, and you would get like, that would be like I took all the oxygen away, right? It's like I came back from DARE training, doing attachment training. I presenced all this stuff. You were like, oh my God, this is so great. But there came a point where I was like, Ruben, you need to get your own therapist. You need to go to a group thing with men. And you need to make friends. Fucking hell, make some fucking friends. Because you need other people to help expand who's holding your emotions with you, because my strong feeling was that a lot of your own unmet contact nutrition needs were being projected onto like our sex life and this high desire, low desire thing. And in the end, it was like, oh my God, it's not fucking that. And so you did do that. You went to, what happened first? I think first we did the thing where I helped find some therapists for you. I was like, here's 5 therapists, start at the top and move your way down. We are couples therapist. We also asked her for a referral. So you saw a couple of therapists. One of them referred you to the men's friendship group. You also took Unlearning Patriarchy with Bear. Do you want to talk a little bit about, like, maybe you could start with the men's group?
Yeah, I can't even remember the first therapist I was seeing. Some guy. Oh, he was out in Sydney.
Oh, yeah.
That guy. And it's interesting because I hadn't gone to see Bear. So Bear did the Unlearning Patriarchy course for men. But this was a couple of...
That was during pandemic.
That was during pandemic?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So this was several years before that. But I was already having a difficult time finding counselors or therapists to work with who were talking about patriarchy, which felt very limiting. So that guy, I saw him a few times.
Wait, we forgot. The very first thing was bell hooks.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so the very first thing, before it was like, I had said, you need to do these things, which takes a while. But first you read, and then I read The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love. And one of the incredible things about that book is, it's talking about how patriarchy hurts men as much as women, or in different ways, but certainly in very particular ways. And that if women want men to be more emotional, they have to tolerate men having emotions. And I was so burnt out at holding your emotions and felt so like, oh my God, I've been waiting all this time. And well, yeah, okay, I wasn't holding your emotions very well. I was avoidant, but I felt like I'm constantly coddling. That's what I felt like. I constantly have to manage his emotions, because if we're not having sex enough, or if I'm not a certain way, he's going to be pissy. Yeah. And that's a kind of emotional labor that I just didn't have the tolerance. I didn't have the compassion, because I wanted to be heard. And so that's why I was like, let's do this. I'll go to my therapist and my supervisor. You do that. And I had to do a lot of work on learning to be a better feminist, in the sense that, like, I had to allow you to actually have emotions, but I just didn't have the bandwidth for it yet. So the book came first.
Yeah, foundational to all of this is The Will to Change by Bell Hooks.
Everybody should read it. Yeah. All couples of any gender, because all of us have been conditioned by patriarchy. So there was that. And then tell us about going to the men's learning how to make friends group.
So I think this was after the first actual real counselor guy, who that first guy was a somatic experiencing practitioner. But I just experienced it as being kind of more like talk therapy, which wasn't what I was looking for.
No, we didn't want that.
Yeah, so I stopped going to him and was looking around, and yeah, I don't know where you heard about this. Did you hear about it? Did I hear about it elsewhere? But anyhow, I started seeing
It's like
Maddie Davidyuk, who at that point was, maybe he still is. He's moved up island a little bit. So he had toolbox counseling, and he was working with men. And wasn't like patriarchy wasn't everywhere, but he's hip to it. So he wasn't like, my impression was he wasn't pushing it on every man who walked in his office kind of thing. But when I was talking about it, he was right there and knew what I was talking about, which was amazing. And
what was it about patriarchy? When we're saying, like, we're talking about patriarchy, and I'm saying patriarchy was in our marriage, how would you explain that to someone who's like, what do they mean, patriarchy?
Well, like, you're the person who'd be best to say, like, here's what Ruben was doing that seems really like patriarchy to me. But for me, having the, like, just always remembering that you grew up in this world in which you had constant demands made on you for your time and attention and your body and your sweetness and, all of this. Like, you just had these expectations, like, without rest. Without ever having a rest. There's no break. There's no vacation. Like, that it was just like this ever present. And I guess it's interesting because it's the water, like, maybe for some women it's the water in which they swim, but for you it was like swimming in acid. And so you were very aware of the water in which you swam. And, like, I think that had become conscious for you in recent years, just a few years before we were going through this, like, where you'd really dug into that. But it was torturing you at this time. And so for me to understand, like, just always kind of keep trying to bring in the lens, it's like, yeah, we're doing this and this and patriarchy. So it's just like, for me to always just keep trying to apply and bring that into my understanding. My, like, what is Carmen going through right now? What is Carmen feeling? Carmen is reacting like this. What might be causing that? So
Yeah.
Every time I was doing something, that it's like, oh, Carmen's having difficulties with work and patriarchy. Oh, Carmen, went out grocery shopping and patriarchy. Like, so just always trying to bring that in and layer it on. And yeah, not a lot of counselors for men add that lens.
No,
So,
yeah, there's a quality when I'm thinking of how patriarchy shows up in a marriage, the typical marriage, ours was more typical maybe than it is now. But there is, as you say, an unceasing service to the male gaze and the limited capacity of tracking. It's just, that's like constant and unceasing, but also the invisibilizing of power and influence and pressure. So I think of it as pressure. There's this constant pressure that if you don't have any idea you're applying it, it gets applied even more and worse, and it exacerbates things. And so, yeah, there's like, as a young girl, you are conditioned to the male gaze, you internalize it, it creates all these other problems. Then you get into marriage and you recognize, oh, okay, so we're about to have an argument, and you do not recognize that you are up power and I am down power in whatever it is, whether that's money, whether that's sex, whether that's, how we split the household duties. If a man doesn't recognize the second shift, of doing the emotional labor of, like, tracking everything in a household and how exhausting that is. And the emotional labor of like teaching someone how to treat you is so exhausting. And that's patriarchy. I learned that from Tiffany Joseph. I just want to shout her out again because she was in an early episode of the Numinous podcast, and I asked her, like, what's it like? What's reconciliation to you? And she's like, it's basically you're asking me to teach you how to treat me. Tiffany Joseph is an Indigenous woman. And I was like, oh, fuck. You know? And so that's what I experience as a woman, trying to teach someone that they are in up power and I am in down power, and it is pervasive everywhere. And when I, you know, come back into my home from the world, I just don't have it. I don't have the energy to explain to you all the different ways that I experienced pressure or dismissal by men in the world. It's just everywhere. And then when you like go to express it to your partner and they downplay it or minimize it, or about what someone else has done to me, let's say, that I just, that's anathema. I couldn't handle that. It's like, no, you need to be on my side here. Like, but then having it happen inside an argument or inside a conflict was very difficult. And I'd been doing so much of my own therapy around sexual assault as a teen multiple times, and then as a emergent adult, you know, at 23, I experienced rape. And so having somebody pressure me about all the demands on sex was just, and we started off, we said in the last episode, like, we had a very active and very enthusiastic sex life. And then at some point, I needed it to evolve. And I just got tired of performing siren or performing, ravenous partner. And that was a difficult transition for both of us. So that's what we're talking about with patriarchy. It's a lot. Okay. I'm going to get back to the article for one more part.
You asked me to talk about the friendship group.
Oh, the friendship group. Thank you for reminding me. Go ahead. Yes. I think it's very important for people to know that there is such thing as a group for men to go learn how to make friends.
So Maddie, so I was seeing Maddie one-on-one, and he was like, hey, you know, I also lead this friendship group for men at the Citizens Counseling Center, which is like I think it's free. I can't remember. It was maybe, if there was a charge, it was nominal, like $25 or something for 8 weeks.
It's a nonprofit where the counselors can they can become therapists, licensed therapists by
peer counseling, right?
Yeah, but they are doing this because they're getting training to become registered counselors and therapists, and so they volunteer their time as a quote unquote peer counselor, but they're getting trained to be a therapist. The
co-leader of that group, I didn't get that impression that he wasn't on that track to do anything. Okay. You know, so he just seemed like someone who'd been doing this for a long time. Like it was kind of a vocation maybe or something. So Maddie was like, you know, I lead this friendship group, and I think it would be good for you to go. And I was like, you know, like why? Like, I have a friend, but you know, basically I was like, well, it'll make Carmen happy if I go. So I went, and it ended up being incredibly emotional for, you know, ways I didn't expect. But basically it gave me an insight into men's lives that I hadn't had before, which gives me insight, for example, into the boys who bullied me when I was a kid. You know, just like the really, really shocking, you know, that we had a class on how to shake hands, you know, which I had never considered and still can't imagine how much you have to endure in life in order to not be able to shake someone's hand.
Enduring like violence and threat.
Violence, threat, abuse. So there was some men in that group that had just suffered like daily things that I can't imagine.
Daily beatings.
Yeah, beatings, abuse, belittling, like whatever, they didn't share, nobody shared like great particulars, but it was also like, so when there's someone who is like, it's like, oh wow, obviously they have been very abused, and they're like, I won't talk about that, and they kind of look off in the distance. It's like, oh fuck, that was bad. So yeah, just insight into the kind of default extreme violence that these men had lived through. And so they were coming to a class to
learn how to trust other men.
Yeah, like to be in a room with men who were going to not be that, and who would want to have conversations with them and shake their hand and, be warm. So,
did you feel out of place, or did you feel resonance, or what did you feel?
Yeah,
you grew up with your parents, your dad was cool. He helped you pierce both of your ears when you were 12 years old.
Yeah.
And, this was in a small rural Canadian context. So there were lots of bullies, but you did have a loving home.
Yeah, I certainly did not experience, I experienced nothing like some of what those men experienced. But I imagine that the people who bullied me did. So that was a real insight. And that they had shaped that experience, turned it around and re-expressed it.
And that was masculinity.
Yeah. So that ended up being, I didn't come away with new friends from that group. And I don't know that I learned any new skills, but I did have an amazing experience. Not really a good amazing, but it was very educational. Like I learned a lot, and educational sounds like it's in my mind. It was very educational in my body. I learned a lot.
Yeah, you came home tearful every single week.
I came home wrecked. Yeah.
It gives, I think, not to be punitive, but it, I think, does give you an insight into the kind of masculinity that I grew up around. And now you're 6 foot whatever. If somebody was to bump your shoulder or something walking down the street, it just wouldn't happen that often. You have a certain kind, there is a certain armor. Whereas, as a woman going through the world, especially as a fiery woman like myself, that can end up, pretty dangerous. And the reason I bring that up is because that is a kind of somatic knowing and a somatic bracing that was hard to impart to you when it was time to okay, now let's be soft with each other. It's there is a level of bracing against misogyny, patriarchy, objectification, minimization, belittling, all of that just calcifies inside and, could become a trigger point. One of the ways that you coped with being bullied was to be smart and sarcastic, wordy and sarcastic, and you're good at belittling if you have to, and I'm just good at being a cage fighter, because I was raised with more of a at any moment you will have to physically defend with loudness and bigness and beating at the chest and smart too, but mostly just threatening and intimidating. And so that was a really bad combination.
Yeah.
It was really bad. And so this is where we come to the it's a top down, bottom up. kind of thing. Okay, so let's do one more section of the article.
Okay.
To understand how to evolve an attachment style, we need to understand trauma and the distress cycle. Top down refers to the messages sent from our brain to our body when we perceive a threat. These messages impact our emotions and ability to feel sensation. Top down relates to perception, memory, motivation, and attention. Our thoughts and judgments, our identifications and awareness, all affect our nervous system's capacity for self-regulation when the sense of threat appears. Bottom up refers to the unconscious, involuntary regulation in the nervous system and how it impacts our cognition. Dysregulation in our nervous system affects our emotions and thoughts, masking some threats to appear larger than they are. Making some threats appear larger than they are, and amplifying the alarm bells in our mind. Bottom up is about the felt sense, connection with the body, instinctive impressions mediated through the brainstem as they move upwards from the body to the limbic and cortical areas of the brain. Attunement means to focus caring intent on the body, mind, spirit, and emotional needs of ourselves or another. When a threat is perceived, either through misattunement, neglect, or conflict, information travels from the body to the brain and from the brain to the body, sending distress signals. When misattunement continues, despair sets in. This creates a disconnect from the original need and a focus now on the emotional distress that comes from judgments and perceptions about why the misattunement is happening. This is where beliefs form about our worthiness and lovableness. As the misattunement and distress persist, we begin to lose our capacity to self-regulate. We adapt to scarcity, and we begin to identify with longing but not having. Our identifications during these times of distress help shape our adaptive coping strategies. We might develop a shame-based adaptive style where we feel shame at existing, like we're a burden and don't belong. Anxious attachers will often feel needy, unfulfilled, undeserving, used, hurt, rejected, or unloved. Or we might develop a pride-based adaptive style where we feel pride in being a loner, in not needing others, and in not being emotional. Avoidant attachers often feel strong and in control, and that if they don't look out for themselves, no one will. They take pride in being self-reliant and independent, can be intolerant of flaws or mistakes in themselves and others, fortified by a mask of having it all together, and they like to ensure that they reject first. I mean, I have a soft spot for folks who are avoidant attachers. Mm-hmm. I really do, because obviously I can smell my own, and I know how that feeling is when you're like, oh wow, no one is coming to attend to my needs, so I might as well just turn the signal way down on my needs. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, you don't know that you have needs. You just don't, and you don't get the signals. I probably, if I'd had any attunement to myself, I wouldn't have had panic attacks,
Yeah, I have a real soft spot for avoidant attachers too, Carmen. I think, it's like there's like 3 more problems than anxious attachers have. Like with anxious attachment, there's a hope that what they say is vaguely approaching what they need. Like there's probably a bunch of echoes and backlash effects and stuff like that. You can't really trust everything that comes out of their mouth, but it's like, but they're basically just saying, like they're saying, I need.
Yeah, I need.
And they may not be accurate about what it is they need.
Yeah.
But they are accurately reporting that they need.
Yeah, and they may be very inaccurate about what it means if their needs aren't being met.
Yeah.
Whereas, what were you going to say?
Whereas avoidant attachers are inaccurately saying, I don't need. Mm-hmm. So, first you have to break through that concrete box. Mm-hmm. And then we had to jumpstart your bodily reporting system. Mm-hmm. And then we had to get to meeting the needs.
Yeah. So you had to do a lot of, so you learned about patriarchy, and that enabled you to be like, okay, so I do need to presence safety. I have to be a safe person for this woman.
Before the concrete box, before there's any hope of the concrete box coming down, you had to feel safe.
You had to release pressure on me, stop all kinds of pressure, and just bring the contact nutrition and just bring the unconditional love and like pretty much subsume your needs for a long time.
Yeah,
Dear listeners.
It was 2 years to start.
Yeah.
And then, before it, I would kind of think of it in like 6-month chunks. Like, okay, I can do another 6 months.
Not that, just also, dear listeners, it's not that we weren't having sex. When I say take off pressure, I mean all kinds of pressure.
We were going on picnics and, like we had a fully functional and joyful life.
Yeah, there was romance, there was like enjoyment. We weren't miserable all the time, but there were these like ways in which I would feel pressure or I would feel frustration. And you had to really not bring a lot of problems to me for a long time.
Well, and it was really comprehensive, right? There was there was a year and a half where I never asked you for sex. And we only made love when you initiated.
Yeah.
And there were good chunks of time. Like often it would be like maybe you'd go to therapy and you would discuss sexual assault. And for like months afterwards, I would be really ramping up the sort of like safe touch, like not being sexy with you in the kitchen,
or like, no body jokes if I hadn't like invited that.
Yeah, BAWDY.
Not BODY. No
jokes.
Saucy jokes.
Yeah, no saucy jokes.
Like no kind of inference stuff, no subtle sideways things, no kind of random boob grabs or whatever. It would be, you had to be very attuned to what I was working through.
But then also just, safety in the, what you were talking about earlier. So again, I'm super burnt out and it's really hard for me to track thoughts over time, complex thoughts. So like the amount you read is 5 times more than I can keep track of. So as I'm trying to respond here, it's like my mind wanders away. So
can you feel my feet on your feet?
Yes, I can.
Can you see my eyes looking at you?
No, because my eyes are closed.
I love you.
I love you too. There was lots of other just trying to presence safety, like in what you were speaking about earlier, of the pressure, just kind of like the ever-present pressure of patriarchy, to just try to, and I can't remember that particularly well, but lots of it just like not arguing about things, so that's something I wanted to say about that last chunk you read, is that the thing that, like, if there's one thing that really stands out to me, it's that the argument is, it's just never about the words. It's almost never about the words. Like, there is something like, you would get pissed about the house was a mess and you'd get angry about it. But what that is the distress call that it's like, I need. And so, my reaction is like, either to placate you and be like, oh, it's not that messy. Look, we did this. Look, this isn't so bad over here.
Well, I did this.
Yeah. Or to fight and be like, well, it's your mess. Like, look at all this shit that you've left out, So
or
all
you
of
could
those,
say that in a different way.
Yeah. Or like, why don't you just stay on top of things? And I'm happy to clean. Like, I was always like, I'd love to do a 10-minute tidy up every day, and could never get the family on board with that. And so then I would just like jumping into that fight of reasons, and that's just the wrong thing to do. It's not about reasons, it's about need.
Yeah, there's nothing logical about this.
Yeah. And so there was huge parts in this kind of trying to be safe for you, where you would be blown up about something, and I would just be like, this is not about reasons. This is about need. And so I would just try to be present and calm and validate and be like, yeah, that really makes sense, you know. So yeah, I can't remember. I know there was other kind of strategies that I was trying to do as well to just really tone down that reflex, the trauma response in you, at least within our household.
But you were also doing a lot of then self-regulating, because when I get upset, that triggers your insecure attachment, where you're like, oh my God, she's leaving me, we're breaking up, we're, you know, like our relationship is more precarious than I thought it was. And then instead of me having to go and tend to you, it took a couple years of me being able to trust that, like, okay, I don't have to take care of Ruben for 3 days and like coo at his amygdala several times a day just to bring our relationship back to where it was, just because I got like overwhelmed by the dishes or whatever. And so that was a lot for you.
It was a heavy lifting. And I was thinking earlier when you're describing the dynamics of fighting, how we would fight and then you would have to caretake me. And one of the things that I was remembering is that I would almost never bring anything up with you, because as with an anxious attachment style, I was afraid of you. And so, you know, it's like to bring up something with you that it's like, hey, I really don't love how this is happening here in our household. You know, obviously that would lead to a fight and you would shortly leave me.
Right. That would, you would be setting off the time bomb, the atomic bomb of our relationship.
So then we get into fights. And of course, I'm filled with resentment and frustration about all the things that it's like, you say you want this, but you're not doing this kind of thing. You know, it's like all of the resentments of life. And so we get into a fight and I couldn't contain that. I couldn't regulate myself through that. And so then, you know, obviously against my better interest, I would bring my complaints to the table when you were mad. And then, and by the end of it, you needed to coddle me. And so that's previous to this, you know, that was sort of the dynamic previous to this sort of initial couple of years of just trying to present safety, where I had to really self manage.
And you did that through, like, you did more therapy. You did start having man beers where you and 3 guys would go out and just talk about stuff, and definitely like increase the priority of like getting away, going on canoe trips, like just having a more emotionally rich life with other people that weren't me. And also you learn a lot through osmosis by what I teach, right? Through the Secure course, you came to my attachment for parents workshops and stuff. And it's really hard you can't attend an attachment for parents workshop and not bring your own childhood to the table, right? So there was a lot. There was, in the early part of our relationship, you were like, oh, I had a perfect childhood. I don't really remember much before I was 8 years old, but my parents were ideal. I've never wanted to have kids, but it's because I was raised so great. And it really took a lot of years. And it was like after you'd gone to therapy that I finally was like, oh my God, yes, you do have attachment issues. And for you to be able to really look at the amount of emotional isolation you experienced growing up with parents who were very preoccupied with their own stuff.
And isolated in the bush.
So there was a lot going on. I want to wrap up in a minute, but I also want to bring in a adjacent thing. So do you want to make a point before I bring in the adjacency?
Well, I was just going to mention in that time also is when I started spending time with the full moon.
Oh, tell people about, yes. Okay. So I was like, I think you should go see our friend Shauna. Shauna Janz is an incredible grief work practitioner. And I was like, I think you should take this patriarchal grief and pain and And also, I was trying to encourage you to explore like animism, because I kept saying like, you are a woo-woo guy, you are an animist, you can't learn from me though. I didn't want to be your spiritual teacher. And you went to Shauna to talk about grief.
Yeah. I'm a recovering rationalist.
Yeah.
But strong in that practice is the proceed as if. Just like, what if we pretend that this is how it is? And so, I went to see Shauna, and I talked about, the environment and collapse and patriarchy and love.
Gardening.
Soil. Yeah. And Shauna said, I think you should take your grief to the garden. And it immediately made sense to me that I should lie in the garden under the full moon. And so that's what I did. I did that for a full year without missing a full moon. If there are no children in the room, I will share that I did it naked. So that meant in snow and in rain and in summer warmth, I would get naked and go lie in our garden under the full moon. And it's really interesting. Like, it's very interesting that you now teach the tremor. What is it that you call it?
Therapeutic tremor.
The therapeutic tremor. Because, when you're lying naked in the snow, your body starts shaking. And so it's just interesting to look back and wonder how if that was a useful practice. My body would shake in the cold. I had this experience several times where it's raining and it's kind of like the sky is like rain tears are running down my face, so it was a very not just grounding but embedding practice in the earth and the atmosphere and the weather.
And then you would come back inside and have a bit of whiskey.
And have some whiskey and have a hot shower and wash the bark mulch off my back.
After that, we started to do the ritual of the marriage moon together.
Yeah.
And that meant that every full moon, we would have this large piece of paper, and it was like, here are the things that I would like. These are the needs that I have. And I trust that if and when you have capacity, that you will fulfill these needs for me. And so that was a key part. It was like, okay, so we both have needs. These are important things for our marriage that we're both bringing. We're not necessarily going to get them met, but it's you, me, and the moon. And all of us are agreeing that these are important priorities. And if we have capacity, we trust that we will fulfill it for the other, and we trust that they will do it for us. And we would throw that prayer up to the moon and be like, please help us.
So it was basically like a bitch list. Like, we both just wrote down everything that we were mad about and unfulfilled about, right? But then we laid it aside. And it was like, so we're going to stop fighting about this. And what we're going to do is once a month, go back and read this list.
Yeah, and we're going to ask the moon, is there any movement on this that we can do? And I remember one time we burnt something. This wasn't the list that we were using every time, but remember one time we did a ritual where we went out and we were burning, I guess, kind of the bitch list, and we put it in, and the owl came and flew over the flames. So owl we already had owl as a guardian for our marriage, but that was really powerful because we were like, okay, we're just putting these resentments into the fire, and we're asking the moon to bless our marriage again. And we put moonshine. So we put our list in, we poured moonshine over, the flames went higher, and the owl at that moment flew over and landed on the other side of the flames looking at us. And what kind of animal would fly towards the fire?
Yeah.
Come on, that was very much an auspicious thing.
That was very special. It was the ritual of marriage moon is how I started cooking dinner. Because
That's right.
You said in there that you would like me to to cook 3 nights a week.
Before that, I was the cook and you were the clean.
And I was the clean. Yeah. There was like 3 things that were on the list that I was like, I can do these. And that was good.
Yeah, it was good. Okay, before we wrap up, the adjacent thing is I just want to circle back to when you were feeling overwhelmed by all the words and couldn't track it. First of all, I want to say it's because it's very wordy. So, I would write that differently if I were to go back over it. I don't think that's useful for people who are in it, struggling. But also what I want to say is I'm noticing how, like, that's an example of patriarchy, that you can feel like, I don't know, like you feel enfeebled and it makes you feel vulnerable. And I see that as another way that patriarchy is cruel to men, to like put your body through so much for so many years, to truly sacrifice everything you have and then feel that you can't be tired or befuddled or overwhelmed after, that there's like no place for you, just is heartbreaking. So I just want to say, I don't care that you weren't following what I was saying, because it's not important and it wasn't very well written anyway, but it doesn't matter, because I know you know what you're talking about, and it's okay to be tired. I think people will really enjoy this conversation anyway. That's probably the least favorite part of the whole show.
The burnt out brain is maybe not, the podcast format is maybe not the best for the burnt out brain. It is, I can track much smaller chunks of text, but that is not necessarily as interesting for the podcast listeners if we have to interrupt every few minutes to make sure that Ruben's still got the plot. But yeah, it is patriarchy. I've been wrestling a lot in this burnt out period with productivity and my own, as you know, I fundamentally consider myself quite a lazy person, and
Which is hilarious.
I'm always surprised when people tell me they think I'm a hard worker, because it's like, I don't get anything done. But I'm usually moving and usually doing something. And so what I'm not is a very good producer under capitalism. I've never been strongly motivated by money or career or anything like that. So I'm a bad employee. That's not true. I'm an excellent employee.
Yeah,
but
you keep talking, and I'm like, he's not saying anything true, because you work incredibly long. You're always moving. You work incredibly long days, but it's doing projects. It's ameliorating our life. It's like constant either handiwork or writing, or you're fixing something for someone else, and like late, it's been a few years now when I've had to be like, okay, Ruben, I'm trying to have better sleep hygiene. I'm trying to be less of a workaholic. Can you not start projects at 9 p.m.? You work incredibly
so
long days.
I'm not a good producer under capitalism, but I've always been productive for my own desires of what I want to improve around our house or improve around our garden, or I've always been a producer in our own life, and so to lose that capacity too has been very destabilizing for me.
That makes sense to me. And I'm also really happy to see you taking naps for the first time in the whole time I've known you. I know it's not under your own, if it were your choice, you would rather be outside, gardening or something. But you were working hard for a long time. And so it's like all of the rest that was needed to be interspersed is like your body is forcing you to take it now. But I see how much patriarchy informs our standards of what's acceptable, and how hard, somatically difficult, it feels like biologically wrong for you to not be productive all day long. And it's hard to watch you struggle against that when I just want you to rest.
Well, and I got to this state because of patriarchy within myself and within my workplace.
Totally.
So, anyway, out of those 2 pages of text, I did catch, as I said, but let me repeat. The important part is that it's not about all the reasons. It's about the person is saying they have a need. And often that need is just to be like held and said, this matters, you matter.
Well, and we'll talk maybe next time about meeting and matching, because there was also a feeling where I needed you to like meet me. And one of my triggers is condescension. And I would feel so condescended to, and you'd be like, I am the reasonable, level-headed one, and I am co-regulating you. And I'd be like, oh! So maybe next time we can talk about Wreck-It Ralph and how I needed you to like really meet me emotionally and not be afraid of my emotions that were like anger, frustration, and to actually like increase your range of capacity to meet and match me. You know, that's a thing for anxious folks, right? Always wanting to like downregulate, and the fear and anxiety about like explosive emotions. And so that actually was like a two-way street. I needed to be able to like be more predictable, less of the like serenity now, insanity later. And also you needed to be able to like upregulate and meet me and be like, oh yeah, that's frustrating, without fixing it, just being with me in it. So we can go into more detail.
Another thing, that's another thing that you presenced for a couple of years, because your explosive outbursts did lead to ripcords, you storming out, threats to our relationship, etc. So like, my anxiety had very reasonable and real scary precedent.
Yeah, for sure. There was definitely times where like we did separate for a week where I was like, I cannot. Nope, I'm leaving. And we did. Yeah. So yes, there was precedent for.
So you took ripcord off the table.
Yeah,
like I was trying to, presence safeness to you, and it took. It took a while before I was like, okay, I think maybe her anger is not going to end this relationship.
Yeah, I stopped with the, basically I was like, okay, I've decided, I flicked the switch. I'm not going to I will not be the threat to our bond. So even when I'm angry, I will reassure you that this is not threatening our bond, and no more ripcord, no parachuting out of this, no threats to leave, no looking at real estate at midnight, imagining other lives and where I could live. I just had to be like, nope, this is it. This is my person, and I'm not going to undermine his sense of security in that way. Okay, Kat's starting to mule at us. She wants us to go.
Kat really wants to go outside.
She's done. Okay, so thank you so much, friends, for listening to us for episode 2. Next time we're going to come back, we'll get more into actual self and co-regulation. I also want to thank all the people who have purchased the Spirited Kitchen. Thank you for that. And if you haven't already, you could leave a review. That would be awesome. If you've already left a review, you could buy another copy as a gift for a friend, or you could post that you're cooking a recipe or something like that. Anything you do to increase visibility of the Spirited Kitchen is absolutely, it feels like life force to me.
Much appreciated.
It's so appreciated at the Spanderson household. And if you would like to dive more deeply.
I just want to say the Spirited Kitchen is all about attachment. To people, but also to place and to foodways and to culture and to ancestors. It's attachment from the beginning to the end. Yeah, without saying, hey, everybody has attachment styles. It's like, this is embodied attachment. This is implemented attachment. This is how you do it, not just with your beloveds, but also with yourself, with your ancestors, with the land you live on, with the season that you're in, with the foods you're eating. Thanks for saying the language you speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all in there. It's the how-to for the entire Wheel of the Year.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, yes, if you wanted to take attachment courses, you could watch them with your beloveds. You would sign up for the Numinous Network and access any of my 3 attachment courses. So one is called Secure, the Magical Art and Subtle Science of Attachment. I go deeply into that. That has like 10 lectures, and they're all like over an hour long. There's a ton of citations and Q&As in there. There's a short course called Contact Nutrition 101, which is really the building blocks of secure attachment. When we're talking about self-regulation and co-regulation, we're talking about contact nutrition, and there is a how, 5 kind of basic things you can do. And then there's a course on attachment for parents of teens. Those are on-demand videos, and we also have attachment jams and contact nutrition drop-ins. We have live events that happen as well. And the therapeutic tremoring, which you brought up, Ruben, that happens Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the Numinous Network. It's not just me leading all these things. There's about 10 of us guides. And as I said, they're all part of the Numinous Network, my monthly membership subscription. And every month there's like 30 live events or more. In April, there's like 44. Sometimes it just happens that way. So it's all centered around cultivating secure attachment with yourself, with others, and with the more than human realm. You can learn more about it at carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. We'll see you next time for the next episode. Till then,
Take care.
Right on cue. Good job.
Pew pew, finger guns.